Hello, my friend. Before you scroll away, I want you to do one small thing for me. I want you to say your name out loud, right now, in English. Just your name and one sentence about how you feel today. Go on, say it out loud, even if you are sitting in a quiet room, even if someone might hear you. Did you do it, or did you just think about doing it? If you only thought about it, that is exactly why you are here. That is exactly why this video exists. My name is William Parker, and for more than 20 years I have taught English to people from almost every country you can name. Engineers who could read technical manuals in English but froze when a colleague asked them a simple question in a meeting. Doctors who could write perfect medical reports but could not order coffee without their hands shaking a little. Students who scored high marks on every grammar test but went completely silent the moment a real human being looked at them and expected an answer. And here is the strange thing. Almost every single one of these people believed the same wrong idea. They believed that if they just studied a little more, read a little more, memorized a few hundred more words, then one day, magically, speaking would become easy. They were waiting for a feeling of readiness that was never going to arrive on its own. Because readiness to speak does not come from studying. It comes from speaking.
I know that might sound almost too simple, maybe even a little annoying to hear, especially if you have spent years, real years of your life, buried in grammar books and vocabulary apps. You have done the work. You have shown up. So why does your mouth still feel frozen the second a real conversation starts? Today I am going to tell you exactly why that happens, and more importantly, I am going to give you a full, practical system you can use starting tonight, in your own home, alone if you need to finally break through this wall. No classroom required, no expensive tutor required. No embarrassing yourself in front of strangers required, not yet anyway. Just you, me, and about the next hour of honest, useful teaching. This is not going to be a video full of vague motivation where I just tell you to believe in yourself and everything will work out. I respect you too much for that, and frankly, you have probably already heard that kind of empty encouragement 100 times and it has not changed anything. Instead, I am going to walk you through 8 powerful chapters, each one building on the last, each one giving you something concrete to actually do. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why your current approach has not worked, and you will have a complete home practice system that can genuinely change how you speak within weeks, not years. So get comfortable, maybe grab a notebook if you like taking notes, though you do not need one, and let us begin. Chapter 1. The lie you have been told about learning a language. Somewhere along the way, probably in a school classroom when you were young, someone taught you that learning English means learning rules, grammar rules, spelling rules, verb tables, lists of irregular past tense forms that you had to memorize for a test on Friday. And because that is how your formal education began, your brain quietly decided that this is what learning a language actually means. Rules, lists, correctness, tests. This idea is not entirely wrong, but it is dangerously incomplete, and that incompleteness is the root of almost every speaking problem I have ever seen in 20 years of teaching. Here is what nobody explained to you clearly enough. Language lives in 2 very different places in your brain. One place holds knowledge. This is where you store the rule that says we add ed to a regular verb to make the past tense, or that who refers to people while which refers to things. This is declarative knowledge, the kind of knowledge you can explain to someone else, write down, and be tested on. But speaking a language does not come from that place. Speaking comes from a completely different system, something researchers call procedural memory. The same kind of memory that lets you ride a bicycle or type on a keyboard without looking at your fingers. Nobody rides a bicycle by thinking through the physics of balance and momentum in their head while pedaling. You learned to ride a bicycle by getting on the bicycle, wobbling, maybe falling once or twice, and doing it again and again until your body simply knew how, without your conscious mind needing to manage every movement. Speaking English fluently works exactly the same way. And here is the painful truth. You cannot become fluent by only feeding the knowledge system, the part of your brain that memorizes rules and vocabulary lists. You must also train the procedural system, the part that produces speech automatically, in real time, under the pressure of a real conversation.
And the only way to train that system is through actual production, actually forming sentences with your mouth, out loud, again and again, in real conditions or conditions close enough to real that your brain treats them seriously. This is why you can know a grammar rule perfectly and still make the exact same mistake when you speak quickly. Your knowledge system knows the rule. Your speaking system was never trained to apply it automatically. These are two different muscles, and for years you have probably been going to the gym and only exercising one arm. Think about how many hours you have spent reading English, watching videos with subtitles, doing grammar exercises in an app, maybe even taking notes on vocabulary. Now be honest with yourself. How many of those hours involved you actually opening your mouth and producing full sentences out loud, without reading them from a page, without translating slowly in your head first? If your honest answer is very few hours, or almost none, then you have found the exact reason you feel stuck. It is not that you are bad at languages. It is not that you lack talent. It is simply that you have been training the wrong muscle for a very long time, and no amount of additional grammar study is going to fix a speaking problem, because speaking problems are only fixed by speaking. I want you to really sit with this idea for a moment, because once you truly accept it, everything else in this video will make much more sense. Studying gives you the raw materials. Speaking is the only process that turns those materials into a finished, usable skill. A carpenter can own the finest wood and the sharpest tools in the world, but if he never actually builds anything with his hands, he will never become a skilled carpenter. He simply owns potential that has never been activated. You are not lacking potential. You have plenty of it, probably more than you realize, sitting in your brain right now, in every word you have ever studied, every grammar rule you have ever learned, every sentence you have ever read. What you have been missing is the activation process. And that activation process is what the rest of this video is going to give you. Chapter 2. Why your brain panics the moment you try to speak. Let me describe a scene and tell me honestly if it sounds familiar. You are in a conversation, or maybe just imagining one. Someone asks you a question. In that split second, your mind starts racing. You know the words. You probably even know the grammar. But instead of the sentence flowing out smoothly, you feel a kind of internal traffic jam. Your thoughts crash into each other. You start a sentence, realize it is wrong, stop, try again. And by the time you finally speak, you sound hesitant, broken, nothing like the confident, fluent version of yourself that exists inside your head when you are alone, thinking in English. This experience is so common among language learners that it deserves its own name, and I call it the translation trap. Here is what is actually happening inside your brain during that frozen moment. Instead of thinking directly in English, your brain is quietly performing a hidden three-step process. First, it forms a thought in your native language. Second, it searches for the correct English translation of that thought, checking grammar and word choice along the way. Third, it finally produces the English sentence out loud. All of this happens in a fraction of a second, but it takes real mental energy, and under the pressure of a live conversation, this three-step process simply cannot keep up with the natural speed of real speech. Native speakers, and even fluent non-native speakers, are not doing this three-step process. They think directly in English, and the words simply come out, the same way your own native language comes out of your mouth without any conscious translation happening at all. Understanding this mechanism changes everything, because it tells us exactly what we need to train. We do not need to translate faster, we need to eliminate translation entirely and build a direct connection between thought and English speech. This is a completely different skill from vocabulary memorization, and it requires a completely different kind of practice, which I will show you exactly how to build starting in the next few chapters. But there is a second reason your brain panics when you try to speak, and this one is emotional rather than mechanical. It involves something psychologists call the affective filter, a concept that was first clearly described by the linguist Stephen Krashen many years ago, though teachers who paid close attention to their students had probably sensed it long before it had a scientific name. The idea is simple but powerful. When you feel anxious, embarrassed, judged, or afraid of making a mistake, your brain essentially puts up a wall between the language knowledge you have stored and your ability to access it in real time. The knowledge is there, it has not disappeared. But fear blocks the door to that room, and no matter how hard you try to push, the door will not open while that fear filter is active. This explains something that confuses many learners deeply. You might speak beautifully when you are alone in your room, practicing sentences with nobody listening. Your grammar flows, your vocabulary appears naturally, you sound almost fluent to yourself. But the moment a real person is standing in front of you, especially someone you want to impress, or someone who might judge you, that same fluency disappears completely. This is not because your English got worse in the presence of another person. It is because fear raised the filter, and the door to your knowledge slammed shut. Here is why this matters enormously for how you should be practicing at home. If fear is a major part of what blocks your speaking, then part of your training must involve gradually lowering that fear in a safe, controlled environment before you ever step into a high-pressure conversation. This is exactly why so many traditional classroom methods fail people. Classrooms are often high-pressure environments by their very nature. You are being watched by a teacher, judged silently or openly by classmates, worried about making a mistake in front of people whose opinion matters to you. For many learners, the classroom itself becomes a factory that produces exactly the fear that blocks speaking in the first place. This is also exactly why practicing at home, alone, in a truly safe space, is not some inferior substitute for real classroom practice. For many learners, it is actually the superior starting point, because it allows you to build the speaking muscle and lower the fear filter at the same time, without the added pressure of a real audience watching your every mistake. Once that foundation is built at home, stepping into real conversations becomes dramatically easier because you are not trying to learn to speak and manage fear and perform for an audience all at the exact same moment. You have already handled 2 of those 3 challenges before the real conversation even begins. So remember these 2 enemies as we move forward: the translation trap, which is a mechanical problem of thinking in the wrong order, and the affective filter, which is an emotional problem of fear blocking access to knowledge you already possess. Every technique I am about to teach you in this video is specifically designed to attack one or both of these 2 enemies directly. Chapter 3. The silent period is not laziness, it is a trap. I want to talk about something many learners experience but very few understand, something I call the silent period trap. And I want to be honest with you, because I think you deserve honesty more than comfortable words. Many learners spend months, sometimes years, in what feels like preparation mode. You tell yourself, once my vocabulary is a little bigger, I will start speaking more. Once I finish this grammar course, I will feel ready to have real conversations. Once I watch enough English videos and understand them without subtitles, then speaking will come naturally. This feels responsible. It feels like patience. It feels like doing things the right way, building a strong foundation before attempting the harder task. But here is the uncomfortable truth I have watched play out again and again over 20 years of teaching. For most learners, that moment of feeling ready never actually arrives. The goalpost keeps moving. You reach the vocabulary size you thought you needed, and instead of feeling ready, you notice new gaps and decide you need even more words before you can really speak well. You finish the grammar course, and instead of confidence, you become even more aware of the countless grammar points you have not yet mastered, which makes speaking feel even more intimidating than before. The silent period does not naturally end on its own. It only ends when someone makes the deliberate choice to end it, on purpose, often before they feel fully ready. This matters because waiting for the feeling of readiness before you speak is, in a very real sense, backward. Confidence in speaking is not something you accumulate quietly through study and then finally spend once you have enough. Confidence is a product of speaking practice itself. It grows from the actual experience of forming sentences out loud, making mistakes, surviving those mistakes, and discovering that the world did not end. You cannot think your way into speaking confidence. You can only speak your way into it. I remember a student of mine, a software engineer from Seoul, brilliant with technical English, who told me he had studied English for 14 years before he ever had what he considered a real conversation with a native speaker. 14 years. Not because he lacked ability, but because he was always preparing, always one course away, one vocabulary app away from feeling ready. When he finally forced himself into real conversation practice, guess what happened? He discovered that his English was actually far better than he believed, hidden underneath years of accumulated fear and disuse. The knowledge had been there the entire time, waiting for permission to come out. I tell you this story because I suspect a part of you recognizes yourself in it. Perhaps you have been in your own silent period for a year, or 5 years, or longer. And I want to gently but firmly interrupt that pattern right now, in this video, because the pattern does not end on its own. It requires a decision. Here is the decision I am asking you to make today. Not next month, not once you finish some other course, not once you feel ready, today. The decision is simply this. You are going to begin actively producing spoken English out loud every single day, starting now, regardless of how imperfect it feels. Not because your English is ready, but because speaking is the only process that will ever make it ready. The remaining chapters of this video will show you exactly how to do this safely, at home, in a way that builds real skill, rather than just repeating the same mistakes without improvement. But the decision itself, the willingness to start before you feel ready, that part is something only you can make, and I am asking you to make it right now while you are watching this. Chapter 4. The Mirror Method, your first and most powerful tool. Now let us get very practical, because I promised you a real system, not just ideas, and I intend to keep that promise. The first tool in your home practice system is something I call the Mirror Method, and despite how simple it sounds, I consider it one of the most powerful speaking exercises available to any learner, at any level, anywhere in the world, with absolutely no equipment required beyond a mirror you probably already own. Here is exactly how it works. You stand or sit in front of a mirror, close enough that you can clearly see your own face and mouth. And then, for a set period of time, perhaps 5 or 10 minutes to begin with, you simply speak English out loud to yourself, looking directly at your own reflection as though you were speaking to another person. Why does this work so well, and why the mirror specifically, rather than simply speaking out loud to an empty room? There are actually several powerful reasons working together. First, looking at your own face while speaking forces a kind of psychological confrontation that talking to an empty room does not. When you see your own eyes, your own expressions, you are engaging the same social and emotional circuits in your brain that activate during a real conversation with another human being. This means the mirror method does something that quiet, silent practice cannot do. It begins training your emotional system, gradually lowering that affective filter I described earlier, because you are practicing the actual feeling of communicating to a face, even though that face happens to be your own. Second, the mirror allows you to observe your own mouth movements, something almost no learner ever does, yet something enormously valuable. English pronunciation depends heavily on precise mouth, tongue, and lip positions that are often quite different from those used in other languages. When you watch yourself in the mirror while speaking, you can notice things you would otherwise never notice, whether your mouth is opening wide enough for certain vowel sounds, whether your lips are rounding correctly for sounds like the dew in water, whether your tongue position looks right for sounds like the th in think. This visual feedback loop accelerates pronunciation improvement in a way that listening alone simply cannot match. Third, and this is a benefit many learners underestimate, the mirror method builds what I call speaking stamina. Many learners can produce a single sentence reasonably well, but struggle enormously when they need to speak continuously for 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes without stopping. Continuous speech requires a completely different kind of mental endurance than isolated sentence practice, and the mirror method, especially as you extend your practice sessions over time, builds exactly this kind of stamina. Now let me give you a concrete way to structure this practice, because simply standing in front of a mirror without a plan tends to produce awkward silence rather than useful practice. Choose a simple topic each day, something from your own real life. Describe your morning routine in detail. Explain what you did yesterday, from waking up to going to sleep. Describe your job or your studies to an imaginary stranger who knows nothing about you. Talk about your favorite food and why you love it. Explain the plot of a movie you watched recently. The key rule is this: once you begin speaking, do not stop to search for a perfect word in your head, and absolutely do not switch to your native language even silently in your thoughts. If you do not know a word, describe around it. If you want to say a word you do not know for umbrella, you can say the thing you hold over your head when it rains. This skill, called circumlocution, describing a concept using words you already know when you lack the exact word you want, is itself one of the single most valuable speaking skills you can develop, because real conversations never wait patiently while you look up a word in a dictionary. Native speakers do this constantly too, more than you might realize, working around gaps in their own vocabulary using the words they already have. I recommend starting with 5 minutes of mirror practice daily, treating it with the same seriousness you would treat a real meeting, not something you squeeze in only if you happen to have spare time. After 2 weeks, extend this to 10 minutes. After a month, many of my students comfortably reach 15 to 20 minutes of continuous speech without significant struggle, something that would have seemed impossible to them when they first began this practice. The mirror does not judge you, does not correct you, does not make you feel embarrassed the way a real listener might during your earliest, most fragile attempts. It simply gives you a safe space to build the raw muscle of continuous, spontaneous English production, which is precisely the muscle that traditional study methods almost never train at all. Chapter 5, Shadowing, Training Your Mouth to Move Like a Native Speaker. The next tool in your home practice system addresses a specific problem that even learners with strong vocabulary and grammar often struggle with, and that problem is rhythm. English is what linguists call a stress-timed language, meaning that certain syllables in a sentence are stressed and stretched out in time, while others are compressed and spoken very quickly, almost swallowed. This creates the distinctive rising and falling musical pattern that native English speech has, a pattern that many learners never fully absorb because traditional study focuses so heavily on individual words and grammar rules rather than the actual rhythm and flow of connected speech. This is where a technique called shadowing becomes extraordinarily valuable, and I want to walk you through it carefully because doing it correctly makes an enormous difference compared to doing it carelessly. Shadowing means listening to a native speaker and speaking along with them at the same time, or with only a very small delay, trying to match their pace, their rhythm, their pauses, their intonation as closely as you possibly can. This is different from simply repeating what someone said after they finish speaking. In shadowing, you are speaking almost simultaneously with the recording, like a shadow following a moving body closely behind it, which is exactly where the technique gets its name. Here is how to begin. Choose a short audio clip, somewhere between 30 seconds and 2 minutes long, of someone speaking English clearly at a natural pace. This could be a podcast segment, a short section of a movie scene, an audiobook chapter, or a video from a news channel. The content should be something slightly below your current comprehension level to begin with, not something so advanced that you cannot understand what is being said even after listening several times. If you are constantly confused about meaning, you are training confusion, not rhythm. Listen to the clip first, 2 or 3 times, without trying to speak along, just to understand the content and get familiar with the general rhythm and pace. Then, on your next listen, begin speaking along with the recording, matching the speaker as closely as you can, word for word, syllable for syllable, trying to catch not just the words, but the exact music of how they are said, where the voice rises, where it falls, where a word gets stretched out for emphasis, and where several words get compressed together and spoken almost as one sound. Do not worry if your first several attempts feel messy and difficult to keep up with. This is completely normal and expected. Shadowing is genuinely difficult even for advanced learners, and the difficulty itself is exactly what makes it so effective, because it is forcing your mouth, your breathing, and your brain's processing speed to stretch beyond their current comfortable limits. The same way lifting a weight slightly heavier than what feels comfortable is what actually builds new muscle strength. I recommend shadowing the same short clip repeatedly, perhaps 10 or 15 times across a single practice session. Watching your own fluency with that specific clip improve noticeably even within one sitting. Then return to that same clip again the following day, and you will often notice that the improvement has stuck, that your mouth has genuinely learnt something new about how to produce that particular rhythm and those particular sound combinations. Over weeks of consistent shadowing practice, something remarkable begins happening that goes far beyond just that one specific clip. Your general speaking rhythm across all of your English, even completely unrehearsed spontaneous speech, begins shifting toward a more natural, native-like pattern. This happens because shadowing trains what we might call your speech production muscles at a physical level, the actual coordination between your breathing, your vocal cords, your tongue, and your lips, in a way that reading grammar books or memorizing vocabulary lists never can, because those methods never engage your actual speech production system at all. I want to give you one important piece of advice about choosing shadowing material. Choose content that genuinely interests you. If you shadow content you find boring, you will struggle to maintain the daily consistency this technique requires to produce real results. But if you choose a podcast about a hobby you love, a movie genre you genuinely enjoy, or a topic you are personally curious about, shadowing stops feeling like difficult homework and starts feeling like an engaging daily habit you actually look forward to, which dramatically increases the likelihood that you will actually stick with it long enough to see the real, lasting results this technique can produce.
Chapter 6, the self-narration habit, turning every ordinary moment into speaking practice.
One of the biggest obstacles learners face is simply finding enough time to practice speaking. Life is busy. Work, family, responsibilities, they all compete for your limited hours, and formal practice sessions, even the short ones I have described so far, can feel difficult to fit into an already full day. This chapter is going to solve that problem by teaching you a technique that requires no extra time at all, because it happens during moments you are already living through anyway. I call this technique self-narration, and the idea is beautifully simple. Throughout your ordinary day, you narrate your own actions and thoughts silently or quietly out loud, in English, as they happen. When you are making coffee in the morning, instead of thinking in your native language, you think or whisper in English. I am pouring the water into the kettle. Now I am waiting for it to boil. The smell of coffee always wakes me up better than the caffeine itself. When you are walking to your car, you narrate, I am looking for my keys. They are always at the bottom of my bag. I really should organize this better. When you are cooking dinner, you describe each step out loud in English as you do it. I am chopping the onions now. My eyes are starting to water a little. Next, I will add the garlic. This might feel strange at first, even a little silly, and that reaction is completely normal. But consider what this technique is actually doing at a deeper level. It is dramatically increasing your total volume of English production time without requiring any additional scheduled time in your day at all. If you narrate your actions for even a portion of your waking hours, you might be producing dozens of additional minutes of spoken or sub-vocalized English every single day, minutes that simply did not exist in your practice routine before, minutes that add up to many additional hours of speaking practice across a single month. There is also a deeper cognitive benefit happening here that connects directly back to the translation trap I described in Chapter 2. Remember that the core mechanical problem blocking fluent speech is the habit of thinking first in your native language and then translating into English before speaking. Self-narration directly attacks this problem because it trains you to think in English about your immediate, concrete, physical reality, the exact opposite of abstract grammar exercises. Over time, with consistent practice, English gradually becomes your default internal narration language, at least for everyday concrete situations. And this is precisely the shift that eliminates the translation delay that makes real-time conversation feel so difficult. I want to give you a practical way to build this habit, because like any new habit, self-narration will not happen automatically just because you know it is a good idea. Choose 2 or 3 specific daily activities to begin with, activities you already do every single day without fail. Perhaps your morning routine, your commute, and preparing dinner. Attach the self-narration habit specifically to these existing routines. Every time you brush your teeth, you narrate in English. Every time you walk to catch your bus or train, you narrate in English. This technique of attaching a new habit to an existing, already automatic routine is one of the most reliable ways psychologists have found to actually build lasting habits, because you are not trying to remember to do something new from scratch. You are simply adding a layer onto something your body already does automatically every single day. As this becomes more natural over the first week or two, you can gradually expand it to more parts of your day until narrating your immediate experience in English starts to feel like a fairly natural background habit rather than a difficult, deliberate effort. Some of my most successful students have told me that after several months of this practice, they occasionally catch themselves thinking in English even about things unrelated to the narration habit itself, a clear sign that the deeper cognitive shift I described is genuinely taking hold in a permanent way. Chapter 7, Recording Yourself, the uncomfortable habit that accelerates everything. I am about to ask you to do something that almost every single learner resists at first, something that feels uncomfortable, sometimes even embarrassing. I am asking you to record your own voice speaking English, and then to listen back to that recording carefully. I understand the resistance. Most people in any language dislike the sound of their own recorded voice. There is even a well-documented psychological phenomenon behind this, related to the fact that we normally hear our own voice partly through the vibrations of our skull and jawbone as we speak, which makes it sound different, usually deeper and richer than how it actually sounds to other people listening from outside our own body. When you hear a recording of yourself, you are hearing your true external voice for the first time, and that unfamiliarity often creates an uncomfortable feeling that has very little to do with the actual quality of your English. Despite this discomfort, I consider self-recording one of the single most powerful diagnostic tools available to any language learner, for a very simple reason. You cannot fix a problem you cannot clearly perceive, and when you are in the middle of speaking, your attention is almost entirely consumed by the effort of producing speech itself, leaving very little mental capacity available to accurately notice your own pronunciation errors, grammar mistakes, or awkward phrasing as they happen in real time. But when you listen back to a recording afterward, with your full attention freed up and no pressure to produce anything new, you suddenly become able to notice details about your own speech that were completely invisible to you in the moment. Here is how to build this into your practice routine effectively. Once or twice a week, choose one of your mirror method or self-narration sessions and record it using the voice memo app on your phone, which almost everyone already has readily available. Speak for 2 or 3 minutes on a topic, exactly as you have been practicing in earlier chapters. Then, and this is the crucial part, listen back to the entire recording with a notebook in hand and simply notice, without harsh self-judgment, 3 specific categories of information. First, notice moments where you paused for an unusually long time, searching for a word or a grammar structure. These pauses tell you exactly where your vocabulary or grammar knowledge has gaps that need targeted attention, information that is far more precise and useful than generic vocabulary study, because it is based on your actual real speaking needs rather than a random list someone else created. Second, notice specific pronunciation issues, sounds that seem unclear or difficult, words where your stress pattern seems off, compared to how you have heard native speakers say the same word. Write these specific words down and return to them later using the shadowing technique from Chapter 5, focusing specifically on those problem words and sounds until they improve. Third, and this one surprises many learners the most, notice the moments where you actually spoke well, where a sentence flowed smoothly, where you found a good way to express something, even if the grammar was not perfect. Most learners are so trained to hunt only for their mistakes that they never notice their genuine progress, and this creates a distorted, overly negative picture of their own actual ability. Celebrating these successful moments, even small ones, is not just about feeling good, though that matters too. It also helps you consciously notice and reinforce the patterns that are already working well for you, so you can lean into them more deliberately in future practice. Over time, as you build a consistent habit of recording and reviewing your own speech, you will begin to notice something remarkable happening. Your recorded voice starts sounding less unfamiliar and uncomfortable, and your ability to self-correct in real time, even during live conversations, gradually improves, because you have trained yourself, through repeated careful listening, to notice patterns in your own speech that most learners never become consciously aware of at all.
Chapter 8, Building Your Complete Daily Speaking Routine.
You now have 4 powerful individual tools: the mirror method, shadowing, self-narration, and self-recording, and I want to bring them together into a single coherent daily routine that you can realistically maintain, because scattered occasional practice no matter how good the individual techniques are, will never produce the same results as a consistent, structured daily habit. Here is a realistic routine designed to fit into a busy life while still producing genuine, measurable progress over time. In the morning, spend just 5 minutes on the mirror method, describing your plans for the day, your current mood, or anything on your mind, before you even leave for work or begin your responsibilities. This sets a tone of English production right at the start of your day, when your mind is fresh and less tired from the demands of the hours ahead. Throughout your day, practice self-narration during your existing routines, your commute, your household chores, any moments where your hands are busy but your mind has some freedom to wander. This costs you no additional scheduled time at all, remember, because it simply attaches to activities you are already doing regardless. In the evening, dedicate 15 minutes to shadowing practice, choosing a short clip of content that genuinely interests you and working through it repeatedly until you can keep pace with the speaker reasonably well. This is a good time for shadowing, specifically because your mind has had a full day of exposure to various stimuli, and this focused, structured practice provides a satisfying sense of accomplishment before you end your day. Once or twice a week, ideally at a consistent time such as every Sunday evening, spend 10 to 15 minutes recording a speaking session and then carefully reviewing it using the 3 categories I described in Chapter 7, tracking your specific vocabulary gaps, pronunciation issues, and genuine successes over time. If you follow this routine consistently, you are looking at roughly 20 to 30 minutes of genuinely focused speaking practice each day, plus additional passive practice woven throughout your existing daily activities through self-narration. This might sound modest compared to the years you may have already spent studying English, but I want you to understand something important about how skill development actually works. 20 minutes of daily, focused, production-based practice will produce more real speaking improvement over 3 months than 3 years of passive study ever could, because you are finally training the actual skill you want to improve, rather than training a related but fundamentally different skill and hoping it transfers automatically into speaking ability, which, as we discussed back in Chapter 1, it simply does not. I also want to address something practical here, because I know many of you are wondering about consistency and what happens on the days when life gets busy or you simply do not feel motivated. Here is my honest advice after 2 decades of watching learners succeed and fail with exactly this challenge. Protect the habit, not the perfect version of the habit. If you only have 3 minutes instead of your usual 20, do 3 minutes of the mirror method rather than skipping the day entirely. The learners who succeed long-term are almost never the ones with the most perfect ideal practice sessions. They are the ones who never allow themselves to have a true 0 day, a day with absolutely no English production at all, because a 0 day makes the next 0 day psychologically easier, and this is how consistent habits quietly fall apart over time. One skipped day slowly becoming a pattern of skipped days. Chapter 9, The Question Loop, Turning Silence into a Conversation with Yourself. One of the strangest problems learners run into during solo practice is not knowing what to say next. You sit down to practice, you say 1 or 2 sentences, and then silence falls, not because you lack English ability, but because you simply run out of things to talk about. This happens to almost everyone at some point, and if you do not have a tool ready for this exact moment, it becomes very easy to quietly give up on that day's practice session, telling yourself you will try again tomorrow when you feel more inspired. I want to give you a specific tool for this exact problem, something I call the question loop. The idea comes from noticing how real conversations actually work. Real conversations rarely stay on one single static topic for very long. Instead, one idea naturally leads to a related question, which leads to an answer, which leads to another question, and the conversation keeps moving forward on its own momentum. You can recreate this same natural momentum by yourself simply by asking yourself questions out loud and then answering them, one after another, the same way a curious friend might keep asking you follow-up questions during a real conversation. Here is how this works in practice. Let us say you begin your mirror practice by saying, "Today I woke up a little late." Instead of stopping there, wondering what to say next, you immediately ask yourself a follow-up question out loud. Why did I wake up late? Then you answer it. I woke up late because I was reading a book until nearly midnight and I could not put it down. Then you ask another question building on that answer. What book was it? And you answer again. It was a mystery novel my friend recommended to me last month, and I am almost finished with it now. Then another question. Do I usually enjoy mystery novels? And so on. Notice what is happening here. You are never sitting in silence trying to invent an entirely new topic from nothing, which is a genuinely difficult mental task, especially while also trying to produce English at the same time. Instead, you are simply following a natural thread of questions and answers, the exact same structure that real conversations use, except you are playing both roles, the curious questioner and the responding speaker, entirely by yourself. This technique is remarkably effective for a second reason too, one that connects directly back to real conversation skills. In actual conversations, a huge part of sounding fluent and engaged is not just answering questions well, but also asking good follow-up questions of your own, showing genuine interest in what the other person has said, rather than simply waiting for your turn to speak again. Learners who have spent significant time building the internal habit of generating natural follow-up questions during solo practice often find that this skill transfers directly into real conversations, where they suddenly find themselves naturally curious and able to ask thoughtful questions rather than freezing up and simply waiting silently for the other person to keep the conversation moving forward on their own. I recommend practicing the question loop for at least part of every mirror practice session. Start with any simple statement about your day, your thoughts, or your surroundings, and then commit to asking yourself at least 5 follow-up questions before you allow the topic to naturally end. At first, this might feel a little forced or mechanical, and that is completely normal for any new technique in its earliest stages. But within a week or two, most learners tell me the question loop starts feeling less like a formal exercise and more like a genuine, flowing curiosity about their own life and thoughts, which is exactly the mental habit that makes real conversation feel natural and enjoyable rather than stressful and effortful. One additional variation worth trying once you feel comfortable with the basic question loop is what I call the disagreement loop. Instead of only asking yourself questions that build naturally on your previous answer, occasionally ask yourself a challenging question, one that pushes back gently on what you just said. If you said you enjoy your job, ask yourself, but is there anything about it you would change if you could? If you said you love living in your city, ask yourself, but what is something that frustrates you about living here? This variation trains a slightly more advanced conversational skill, the ability to hold nuanced, sometimes conflicting thoughts and express them clearly, which is exactly the kind of thinking that real mature conversations often require, well beyond simple surface-level small talk. Chapter 10. Building real vocabulary through speaking, not flashcards. I want to address something that might feel a little uncomfortable to hear, especially if you have spent countless hours using vocabulary apps, memorizing flashcards, or building word lists. I am not telling you that vocabulary study is useless. It has real value, and I am not asking you to throw away every vocabulary habit you currently have. But I do want to show you a different, complementary approach to building vocabulary, one that is directly connected to your speaking practice, rather than existing as a completely separate activity disconnected from real use. Here is the core problem with pure flashcard-based vocabulary study, especially when it exists entirely on its own, separate from speaking practice. Words learned through flashcards are stored in your brain with a particular kind of connection, a connection between the word and its translation or definition. This is a real connection, and it is useful for tasks like reading comprehension, where you encounter a word and need to recall its meaning. But speaking requires the opposite direction of retrieval. You need to start with a meaning or an idea in your head, and then retrieve the correct word to express it, under real-time pressure, without the word being presented to you first the way it is on a flashcard. This is why so many learners can recognize thousands of words while reading, yet actively use only a small fraction of those words when they speak. The words exist in a kind of passive storage that has never been connected to the specific retrieval pathway that speaking actually requires. The solution is to build what I call speaking vocabulary, specifically through the practice techniques we have already discussed, but with one small, deliberate addition. During your mirror practice or self-narration, when you reach a moment where you do not know a word you want to use, do not simply stop, feel frustrated, and move on. Instead, pause briefly, use your circumlocution skills from Chapter 4 to describe around the missing word using words you already know, and then, after your practice session ends, take 30 seconds to look up the specific word you were missing. Write it down in a small notebook or a simple note on your phone, and here is the crucial extra step. The following day, during your mirror practice, deliberately use that exact word in a real sentence, out loud, in context, connected to an actual idea you are expressing. This process, discovering a specific gap through actual speaking, looking up the precise word you needed, and then using that word immediately in your very next speaking session, creates a completely different kind of memory connection than passive flashcard study does. The word becomes associated not just with a translation, but with the actual feeling and context of needing it during real speech production. This is sometimes called productive vocabulary acquisition, and it tends to stick far more reliably than passively memorized word lists, precisely because it is built through the exact retrieval pathway you will actually need during real conversations. I want to suggest a simple weekly habit built around this idea. Keep a small notebook, physical or digital, specifically labeled words I needed but did not have. Every time you hit a gap during your speaking practice throughout the week, whether during mirror practice, self-narration, or shadowing, add the word to this notebook once you discover it. At the end of each week, review this list and choose your 5 most useful words, the ones you suspect you will need again soon in your daily life. Spend your next several mirror practice sessions deliberately weaving these 5 specific words into your spoken sentences, out loud, in genuine context, until they start appearing naturally in your speech without conscious effort. This approach also solves a subtle but important problem with generic vocabulary lists, the ones found in textbooks or apps designed for a broad general audience. Those lists often contain words that are simply not very relevant to your specific life, your specific job, your specific interests and daily situations. The vocabulary gaps you discover through your own actual speaking practice, on the other hand, are automatically perfectly relevant to you because they emerged from genuine moments when you personally needed a word and did not have it. This means every single word you add through this method carries real, immediate practical value, rather than sitting in your memory as an abstract item on a list that may or may not ever come up in your actual life. Hashihash, Chapter 11, The Mistakes That Quietly Ruin Home Speaking Practice. Before we move toward bringing real people into your practice and closing out this video with your 30-day challenge, I want to spend a little time on something important: the common mistakes I have watched learners make when attempting home speaking practice, mistakes that quietly undermine their results, even while they believe they are doing everything correctly. Understanding these mistakes in advance can save you months of practicing in a way that feels productive, but is actually producing far less improvement than it should. The first mistake is what I call silent mouthing, where a learner believes they are practicing speaking, but they are actually only moving their lips very slightly or thinking the words in their head, without ever truly producing full audible sound with proper breath support. This often happens because learners feel self-conscious about their own voice, even alone in a private room, and unconsciously minimize the volume and physical effort of their speech to the point where it barely qualifies as actual speaking at all. The problem with this is that speaking is a genuinely physical act involving breath control, vocal cord vibration, and precise muscle movements in your mouth and throat, and none of these physical components are properly trained if you are only whispering or silently mouthing words. I want you to make a firm commitment, starting with your very next practice session, to speak at a genuine, normal conversational volume, with your full voice, the same volume you would use if a real person were sitting directly in front of you. If privacy is a concern, and I understand it often is, consider practicing in your car with the windows up, in the shower, during a walk somewhere private, or simply explain to family members that you are doing focused practice and would appreciate a closed door and a few minutes without interruption. The second mistake is treating every practice session as a performance rather than as training. Learners who treat practice as a performance become preoccupied with sounding good, with being grammatically correct, with avoiding any mistakes at all, even during solo, completely private practice where literally nobody is listening or judging them. This mindset is deeply counterproductive because it recreates exactly the fear and pressure that the effective filter I described in Chapter 2 thrives on, even in a context, your own private practice, that should be the one truly safe space where that pressure has no reason to exist at all. I want you to consciously reframe your solo practice sessions using a different mental model entirely, the model of a professional athlete during training, not during an actual competition. Athletes make mistakes constantly during training, missed shots, imperfect form, stumbles, and they do not treat these training mistakes as failures. They treat them as simply part of the process of building skill, information to learn from, rather than evidence of inadequacy. Your solo speaking practice deserves exactly this same mindset. Mistakes during practice are not embarrassing failures. They are literally the entire point of practice, because a mistake you notice and correct during private practice is a mistake you are far less likely to repeat during a real conversation later. The third mistake is inconsistent, unpredictable practice timing, relying entirely on finding motivation or free time in the moment, rather than building a fixed, predictable time and place for practice each day. Motivation is, unfortunately, a notoriously unreliable resource, rising and falling based on your mood, your energy levels, and countless other factors entirely outside your control on any given day. Learners who wait for motivation before practicing tend to practice inconsistently, with long, unpredictable gaps, and inconsistent practice, even when the individual sessions are excellent in quality, produces dramatically weaker long-term results than consistent daily practice, even when those daily sessions are shorter or less energetic. This is precisely why I recommended, back in Chapter 8, attaching your practice to specific fixed points in your existing daily routine, your first 5 minutes after waking, your evening period before dinner, because fixed timing removes the need for motivation entirely. You do not need to feel motivated to brush your teeth each morning. You simply do it because it has become an automatic, scheduled part of your routine, rather than a decision you have to consciously make and motivate yourself toward every single day. The fourth mistake, and this one is particularly common among learners with strong academic backgrounds, is overcorrecting yourself mid-sentence to the point where it disrupts your natural flow and speaking rhythm entirely. There is an important difference between the light, natural self-correction that even native speakers do constantly, quickly fixing a slip and continuing smoothly forward, and the kind of heavy, perfectionist self-correction where a learner stops completely, mentally reviews an entire grammar rule, and only then continues, breaking their natural rhythm severely in the process. If you notice yourself making this kind of heavy, disruptive self-correction frequently during practice, try a specific exercise. For one entire practice session, give yourself explicit permission to make every grammar mistake you want, without stopping to correct any of them at all, focusing entirely and completely on maintaining smooth, continuous, natural-sounding speech from start to finish. This exercise feels uncomfortable at first for learners who have spent years being trained to prioritize grammatical correctness above all else, but it directly and specifically trains the fluency muscle, the ability to keep speech moving forward smoothly, which is a genuinely different skill from grammatical accuracy, and one that deserves its own dedicated practice time, separate from moments when you are specifically focused on accuracy instead. Avoiding these four mistakes, silent mouthing instead of full-voiced speech, performance anxiety during private practice, inconsistent, unpredictable timing, and disruptive perfectionist self-correction, will make an enormous difference in how much genuine progress your daily practice actually produces, even using the exact same techniques and the exact same amount of practice time as before. Chapter 12. What to do when you finally talk to a real person. Everything I have taught you so far has focused on solo home practice, and I want to be completely clear about why that has been my focus. Solo practice builds the foundation, the raw speaking muscle, the reduced fear response, the improved rhythm and pronunciation, all of it without the added pressure of a real-time audience judging your every word. But solo practice alone, no matter how excellent, cannot fully replace the unique experience of real, unpredictable, two-way conversation with another actual human being, because real conversations involve elements that solo practice simply cannot replicate, unexpected questions you did not prepare for, needing to actually understand and respond to someone else's meaning in real time, and the genuine, sometimes uncomfortable social pressure of another person's attention on you. So at some point, and I would encourage that point to come sooner rather than later, ideally within your first few weeks of building the home practice habits from this video, you need to begin having real conversations with real people. Let me give you some honest, practical guidance about how to approach this transition well. First, choose your earliest conversation partners carefully. This first step should feel achievable, not terrifying. Language exchange apps, where you speak with another learner who is trying to learn your native language while you practice English with them, are often an excellent starting point, because both people understand exactly what it feels like to struggle with imperfect language, and this shared understanding creates natural patience and empathy that reduces the fear filter significantly compared to speaking with someone who has no personal experience of language learning struggle themselves. Second, prepare yourself mentally for the fact that your first several real conversations will likely feel harder and more awkward than your home practice sessions did, and this is completely normal, not a sign that your home practice has failed. Real conversation involves genuinely processing someone else's unpredictable speech while simultaneously planning your own response, a cognitive load that solo practice simply does not create. Expect this adjustment period and do not interpret early awkwardness as evidence that something is wrong with you or your preparation. It is simply the natural, expected friction of your first attempts at a genuinely new and more demanding version of the skill you have been building. Third, and this is perhaps the most important piece of advice in this entire chapter, actively practice tolerating silence and imperfection during real conversations rather than mentally punishing yourself the moment you make a mistake or need a pause to think. Many learners have a habit of mentally replaying and criticizing their own mistakes even while the conversation is still happening, which pulls their attention away from actually listening to the other person and often causes a second mistake to follow quickly after the first, a kind of cascading anxiety spiral. Instead, when you notice yourself making a mistake mid-conversation, simply continue, perhaps briefly self-correct if it is natural to do so, and then let it go completely, returning your full attention to the conversation itself. Native speakers make speech errors constantly too, correcting themselves mid-sentence, restarting sentences, pausing to think, and nobody considers this remarkable or embarrassing in native speech, because it is simply a completely normal part of how real, spontaneous human speech actually works, in every language, for every speaker, regardless of their level. Fourth, keep your home practice routine running alongside your growing real conversation practice, rather than replacing one with the other. Real conversations give you invaluable exposure to unpredictability and authentic social pressure, but they do not always give you the focused, repeated practice on specific weak points that structured home practice provides. The two forms of practice work best together, each strengthening different aspects of your overall speaking ability, complementing each other rather than competing for your limited practice time. Chapter 13. The 30-day challenge that changes everything. I want to leave you today with something concrete and immediate, a specific, actionable challenge, rather than just a collection of good ideas that remain comfortably theoretical in your mind after this video ends. I am asking you to commit to 30 days, starting tomorrow morning, of the routine I described in Chapter 8. 5 minutes of mirror method each morning, self-narration woven through your existing daily routines, 15 minutes of shadowing each evening, 1 recorded review session each week. 30 days is a deliberately chosen number, not too short to produce meaningful change, not so long that it feels impossibly distant and overwhelming from where you stand right now. 30 days is long enough for your speaking muscles, both the physical mouth and breath coordination, and the psychological comfort with speaking under mild pressure, to genuinely begin shifting in a noticeable way. Many of my students who have completed this exact 30-day challenge report that by roughly day 10 to 14, they notice a distinct change, a feeling that words are coming slightly more easily, that the internal translation delay feels slightly shorter, that the mirror no longer feels quite as strange or uncomfortable to speak in front of as it did on day 1. I want you to track this journey even in a simple way. Perhaps keep a short note on your phone, writing 1 sentence each day about how your practice felt, whether it was easy or difficult, what you noticed about your own speech that day. This record becomes incredibly valuable by day 30 because progress in speaking ability, like progress in almost any skill, tends to feel painfully slow and invisible when you are living through it day by day, yet becomes clearly, sometimes dramatically visible when you look back over a full 30-day span and compare your very first recording to your most recent one. I also want to address, honestly and directly, the moments during these 30 days when you will feel like giving up, because I would be doing you a disservice if I pretended those moments will not happen. There will likely be a day, perhaps around day 7 or day 12, when the initial excitement of starting something new has faded, when practice feels tedious rather than exciting, when you genuinely wonder whether any of this is actually working. This is completely normal, and in fact it is almost universal among learners who eventually do succeed with this kind of structured practice. The difference between learners who transform their speaking ability and those who remain stuck exactly where they started is almost never talent, and it is almost never the specific techniques they happen to use. The difference is simply whether they continued showing up for practice during those difficult, unmotivated middle days when the initial enthusiasm has worn off, but the real results have not yet become clearly visible. So here is what I am asking of you, directly and personally, as we come to the end of this video together. Do not simply agree with what I have said and then close this video and move on to something else without ever actually beginning. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up, before you check your phone, before your day fully begins, stand in front of a mirror for 5 minutes and speak English out loud about anything at all, your plans for the day, how you slept, what you are worried about, what you are looking forward to. That is the entire first step, nothing more complicated than that. Everything else in this system builds naturally from that single small starting action, repeated consistently day after day for 30 days. You have spent years, perhaps many years, studying English, gathering knowledge, building a foundation of vocabulary and grammar that is very likely far stronger than you currently give yourself credit for. That knowledge has not been wasted, and I want to be completely clear about that point before we finish today. It has simply been waiting, patiently, for the right kind of practice to finally activate it into real, spoken fluency. The techniques in this video are that activation process. They are not asking you to learn something entirely new from nothing. They are asking you to finally use what you have already built, out loud, consistently, starting tomorrow morning. I believe in your ability to do this, not as an empty, generic encouragement, but because I have personally watched hundreds of learners, people who felt exactly as stuck and frustrated as you might feel right now, walk this exact path and come out the other side, speaking with a confidence and fluency they once believed was permanently out of reach for them. Your English is not broken, it has simply never been given the specific kind of practice it needs to fully come alive. Give it that practice, starting tomorrow morning, in front of your own mirror, and watch what begins to change. This is William Parker, and this has been the Speaking Mindset. I will see you in the next video, and I truly hope, by then, you will already be a few days into your own 30-day challenge, speaking a little more freely than you were today.